The sound of shells echoed throughout Europe as two major world forces painted the world red, determined to destroy the other's way of life. From July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918, Allied powers, led by Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and the United States, competed in a world contest against the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. All told, the war, fought nearly completely in trenches spread across the European continent, destroyed the lives of an entire generation of young men, while dismantling much of Europe's scenic landscape. The numbers themselves are staggering. Estimated totals suggest nearly 40 million casualties, resulting in over 20 million fatalities. However, it was the damage left for those that survived that brought concern and angst to the European continent. The classic novel, All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Remarque, details the events of World War I from the perspective of a German soldier. It begins with this simple passage. This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all, an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped its shells, were destroyed by the war. On the 11th day of the 11th month at 11 a.m., 1918, the fighting stopped. Germany surrendered and signed the armistice at Compiègne, France, finally putting an end to the Great War. English philosopher George Santayana knew better when he said, "Only the dead have seen the end of the war." Upset about the rapid destruction, Allied leaders George Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Woodrow Wilson of the United States began working on a sensible punishment for Germany in the hope of preventing further aggression and damage. The solution? The Treaty of Versailles. Presented to the German delegation on May 7, 1919, the treaty signed in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles forced Germany to concede vast European territories and oversea colonies. To further Germany's detriment, humiliating verbiage was added to the treaty. Known as a War Guilt Clause, Article 231 forced the German nation to accept complete responsibility for initiating World War I. Germany was required to make enormous reparation payments, and finally the German military was to be severely limited in size and armaments. The Treaty of Versailles strangled Germany into collapse, creating space and opportunity for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to assume power. This diplomatic blunder paved a deadly path towards a second world contest and the near annihilation of the Jewish culture. The Big Three, as they were known, had different motivations in crippling Germany. Clemenceau believed that Germany should be brought to its knees so that she could never start a war again. Woodrow Wilson wasn't entirely invested in ruining Germany. With the Atlantic Ocean separating the U.S. from the dangers in Europe, Wilson's charge was simply to avoid another world war. Clemenceau, finding fault with both of his counterparts, said the following: "What can a mere French minister do when associated with Lloyd George, who thinks he is Napoleon, and Woodrow Wilson, who thinks he is Jesus Christ?" In the end, however, the three were able to successfully create a treaty powerful enough to destroy Germany. Germany was distraught at the thought of signing the treaty. To admit full responsibility, reduce its military to virtually nothing, and to write a blank check to be cashed by the Allies, brought a level of anger to the German people unmatched in history. They were not given a choice, however. They were told to sign or be invaded by the Allies. This ultimatum created serious resentment, enough to later shield some of Hitler's more radical ideals on his way to power. Germany lost vital industrial territory in the treaty and all of its colonies. All told, Germany forfeited 13% of its European territory, more than 27,000 square miles, and 1/10 of its population, between 6.5 and 7 million people. Clemenceau and the others hoped to keep Germany from ever becoming a superpower again. The world was turned upside down after the treaty was signed. Author and historian Eric Foner, a professor at Columbia University, describes the global impact of Versailles.
Well, Woodrow Wilson went to Versailles at the end of World War I, hoping to create what he had been calling for, a peace without victory. Unfortunately, America's allies had their own aims and interests. The British, the French, they wanted to punish Germany. They wanted to get reparations from Germany for all the losses, deaths, economic disasters suffered in World War I. So Wilson is faced with a problem that he has certain ideals, but his allies don't want to go along with them. And so a vast negotiation and set of compromises takes place. The map of the world is redrawn. Wilson's idea of putting together different ethnic groups in their own countries in Eastern Europe comes into fruition. New countries like Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia are created. Moreover, in the rest of the world, Versailles sows the seeds of future conflict and disaster. As I said, instead of giving independence to colonial people, India, African nations, Middle Eastern nations, they just redraw the map of empire and absorb the German colonies into the British and French empires.
Despite his efforts, Wilson's support of the treaty found very little favor back home. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts refused to support the Treaty of Versailles and the newly formed League of Nations, without strict reservations. Lodge and his supporters eventually won out, and the Treaty of Versailles was never ratified in the United States Senate. This failure haunted Wilson until his death in 1924. In 1924, it had become obvious to the world that the treaty, especially the massive reparations saddling Germany, was hurting the global economy. A committee led by Charles Dawes established a plan to relieve Germany financially. The Dawes Plan, adopted in 1924, included added territories for Germany, additional sources of payment, and an extensive loan from the United States. Charles Dawes would win the Nobel Peace Prize in 1925 for his efforts. Unfortunately, this was only a temporary fix. In 1929, industrialist Owen Young led a committee to further relieve Germany of its financial obligations. The Young Plan, which was formally adopted in 1930, reduced Germany's obligations from $32.3 billion to $713 million. It also mandated that the United States government cancel all war debts owed by Allied governments. However, in 1932, Congress rejected the Allied War Debt Reduction Plan, technically reverting responsibility back to Germany. Germany never resumed payment. By this time, Hitler and the National Socialist government had taken control, and no further payments were ever made. By 1933, 14 years after the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had only paid an eighth required under the treaty. The entire idea became irrelevant as Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party assumed power. The peace treaty of Versailles had reached ultimate failure. It had not settled international disputes, rather breaking Germany from the ground up and providing a platform for Hitler to rise to the top. German citizens found Hitler's radical ideas to be soothing and his ultranationalist rhetoric won their hearts. Angered by the damage the treaty caused his people, Adolf Hitler cited the hurt caused by Versailles in his autobiography, Mein Kampf. He writes, "They, referring to the Big Three, did not want to hear or understand that Versailles was a shame and a disgrace, and not even that his dictated peace was an unprecedented pillaging of our people." It was Hitler's determination to find retribution for his people that would cause so much sadness over the next decade and a half. His desperate need for power challenged the very core of humanity and dragged the entire globe into the deadliest contest in world history. The Treaty of Versailles, a dictated peace, created a path to power for Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. From 1939 to 1945, the world would mourn loss as all corners of the globe engaged in the hostilities. World War II deaths cannot be conceived by the average mind. Just alone, Hitler eliminated over 6 million Jews in the name of race purification. Philosopher George Santayana proved prophetic when he noted that only the dead have seen an end to the war. The dictated peace reached at Versailles only escalated global conflict and would eventually push humanity to the brink of destruction.